This being the 4th of July, I'm going to read to you an essay that Mathew Franklin Whittier wrote on this subject in 1845. The catch is that this has been mistakenly attributed to transcendentalist Margaret Fuller. It was not written by Margaret Fuller. It was written by Mathew, who was freelancing with his longtime signature, a star or single asterisk, which he began using in 1829. The last one I've ever found was 1873. He used it in 5 or 6 different newspapers over the course of that career. And Margaret Fuller just appropriated it basically by rumor. So it makes a huge difference who you think is writing to you and who you think is speaking to you. For example, if you get a phone message and it's really from your husband, and you think it's from, the pizza man, you're going to interpret it entirely differently. You're going to experience it in an entirely different way if you misunderstand who is speaking to you. So this was the case with the star signature when it has been appropriated by and attributed to Margaret Fuller. And it works both ways, because not only do you experience the message differently, but you start to reinvent the person whom you think is speaking to you. So, for example, if let's say that you think it's the pizza man and it's really your husband, or vice versa, and that person makes some romantic comment. Well, if you think it's the pizza man, you're going to be upset. If you think it's your husband, you're going to be pleased. So if it's really the pizza man coming on to you and you think it's your husband, it's going to be a total mismatch, see? So that's the case when people think that Margaret Fuller is writing these essays. They misinterpret them. They experience the text differently because of what they understand about Margaret Fuller. And they start to reinterpret Margaret Fuller as being a different person than she was, and attributing to her qualities and values and things that were not actually hers. Because Margaret Fuller was a phony, I think, in a lot of ways. She was apparently raised by her father in Pygmalion fashion, specifically to be a female literary genius. And she was bright, but she really wasn't an inspired genius. She wasn't what her father tried to make her into. So she had to live a lie all of her life, basically. And this just isn't her. And people have used these essays written by Mathew Franklin Whittier, who was actually what Margaret Fuller is supposed to be, which is to say a real transcendentalist, a real person of conscience, a real social reformer, and a truly spiritual person. That was Mathew behind the scenes. Margaret Fuller was not actually those things. So it's a myth, in other words. Now, so before we get into that, I want to remind people that Mathew Franklin Whittier is historically known as the author of Ethan Spike. Ethan Spike is a satire. They're letters to the editor, generally. And they're in the character of an ignorant conservative from Oxford County, Maine, which is still pretty conservative. I don't know that it's ignorant. I wouldn't go that far, but it's still conservative. So this is an ignorant character, and he's patriotic, but he's patriotic in an ignorant sort of way. See, my country, take it or leave it. So literally, in one of his earliest Ethan Spike pieces, he signs, "My country, right or wrong." Of course, he spells right or wrong incorrectly, and I'll put that up on the screen. We actually have a copy. I have a photographic copy of that letter, his only draft of Ethan Spike that I know of in existence. And I also have the printed copy in photographic form, which I'll put up here on the screen. The wording is slightly different, so apparently the letter was a draft. I'm not sure. Maybe it never got sent, and that's why it ended up in a collection. So now we go to the New York Weekly Tribune. And here I have the New York Weekly Tribune. This apparently came from a bound volume, so there's 2 issues bound together. The one on top is the June 28, 1845 weekly. Of course, the weekly consolidated the week's daily newspaper. And then behind that is the July 5th, 1845 weekly, which I have here. And I'm going to read from that because the next day after the 4th, they reprinted this piece, this essay on the 4th of July, signed with the star. It's Mathew's. And I'm going to read the whole thing, however long it takes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. But try to experience this with the understanding that this is the author of Ethan Spike. Now, Mathew was raised Quaker. He's anti-military, especially when the military is used for imperialism. He's not a big fan of nationalism. He is associated with William Lloyd Garrison, whose motto is no union with slaveholders, meaning that he's a disunionist. So it's not that he's unpatriotic or doesn't love his country. It's that he loves other things more. There's other ideals that he puts above nationalism. You know, nationalism is all well and good if the country is expressing high moral values in its actions. Like any other person, it's not reputation, it's not loyalty per se, it's does the person deserve that loyalty, you know? I mean, there's a certain point at which you stick by somebody no matter what they do, but it's not that you praise them to the skies even if they're acting like a scoundrel, you know? So the country is the same way. If the country is acting like a scoundrel, you point that out in such a way as to try to bring the country back up to moral standards. You know, you don't defend it when it's acting reprehensibly. So that's real patriotism. Well, Mathew was a real patriot in that sense. He was a reformer, and he was definitely on the left. So I'm going to read this, but listen to it with the understanding that that's who's speaking to you, and not Margaret Fuller, the egotist and pretend mystic, see? The bells ring. The cannon rouse the echoes along the river shore. The boys sally forth with shouts and little flags and crackers enough to frighten all the people they meet from sunrise to sunset. The orator is conning for the last time the speech in which he has vainly attempted to season with some new spice the yearly panegyric upon our country, its happiness and glory. The audience is putting on its best bib and tucker and its blandest expression to listen. And yet, no heart, we think, can beat today with one pulse of genuine, noble joy. Those who have obtained their selfish objects will not take a special pleasure in thinking of them today, while to unbiased minds must come sad thoughts of capital national honor soiled in the eyes of other nations, of a great inheritance risked, if not forfeited. I think he's speaking specifically of slavery. Much has been achieved in this country since the first Declaration of Independence. America is rich and strong. She has shown great talent and energy. Vast prospects of aggrandizement open before her, but the noble sentiment which she expressed in her early youth is tarnished. She has shown that righteousness is not her chief desire, and her name is no longer a watchword for the highest hopes to the rest of the world. She knows this, but takes it very easily. She feels that she is growing richer and more powerful, and that seems to suffice her. These facts are deeply saddening to those who can pronounce the words, quote, my country, with pride and peace, only so far as steadfast virtues, generous impulses find their home in that country. They cannot be satisfied with superficial benefits, with luxuries, and the means of obtaining knowledge which are multiplied for them. They could rejoice in full hands and a busy brain if the soul were expanding and the heart pure, but the higher conditions being violated, what is done cannot be done for good. Such thoughts shadow patriot minds as the cannon peal bursts upon the ear. This year, which declares that the people at large consent to cherish and extend slavery as one of our domestic institutions, takes from the patriot his home. This year, which attests their insatiate love of wealth and power, quenches the flame upon the altar. Yet there remains that good part which cannot be taken away. If nations go astray, the narrow path may always be found and followed by the individual man. It is hard indeed, when politics and trade are mixed up with evils so mighty that he scarcely dares touch them for fear of being defiled. He finds his activity checked in great natural outlets by the scruples of conscience. He cannot enjoy the free use of his limbs, glowing upon a favorable tide, but struggling, panting, must fix his eyes upon his aim and fight against the current to reach it. It is not easy, it is very hard just now to realize the blessings of independence. For what is independence if it do not lead to freedom? Freedom from fraud and meanness, from selfishness, from public opinion, so far as it does not consent with the still small voice of one's better self. Yet there is still a great and worthy part to play. This country presents great temptations to ill, but also great inducements to good. Her health and strength are so remarkable, her youth so full of life, that disease cannot yet have taken deep hold of her. It has bewildered her brain, made her steps totter, fevered, but not yet tainted her blood. Things are still in that state when 10 just men may save the city. A few men are wanted, able to think and act upon principles of an eternal value. The safety of the country must lie in a few such men, men who have achieved the genuine independence of wrong, of violence, of falsehood. We want individuals to whom all eyes may turn as an example of the practicability of virtue. We want shining examples. We want deeply rooted characters who cannot be moved by flattery, by fear, even by hope, for they work in faith. The opportunity for such men is great. They will not be burnt at the stake in their prime for bearing witness to the truth, yet they will be tested most severely in their adherence to it. There is nothing to hinder them from learning what is true and best. No physical tortures will be inflicted on them for expressing it. Let men feel that in private lives, more than in public measures, must the salvation of the country lie. If that country has so widely veered from the course she prescribed to herself, and that the hope of the world prescribed to her, it must be because she had not men ripened and confirmed for better things. They leaned too carelessly on one another. They had not deepened and purified the private lives from which the public must spring, as the verdure of the plain from the fountains of the hills. What a vast influence is given by sincerity alone! The bier of General Jackson has just passed, upbearing a golden urn. The men who placed it there lament his departure and esteem the measures which have led this country to her present position wise and good. The other side esteem them unwise, unjust, and disastrous in their consequences. But both respect him thus far that his conduct was boldly sincere. The sage of Quincy. Men differ in their estimate of his abilities. None probably esteem his mind as one of the first magnitude, but both sides, all men, are influenced by the bold integrity of his character. Mr. Calhoun speaks straight out what he thinks. So far as this straightforwardness goes, he confers the benefits of virtue. If a character be uncorrupted, whatever bias it takes, it thus far is good and does good. It may help others to a higher, wiser, larger independence than its own. We know not where to look for an example of all or many of the virtues we would seek from the man who is to begin the new dynasty that is needed of fathers of the country. The country needs to be born again. She is polluted with the lust of power, the lust of gain. She needs fathers good enough to be godfathers, men who will stand sponsors at the baptism with all they possess, with all the goodness they can cherish, and all the wisdom they can win, to lead this child the way she should go, and never one step in another. Are there not in schools and colleges the boys who will become such men? Are there not those on the threshold of manhood who have not yet chosen the broad way into which the multitude rushes, led by the banner on which, strange to say, the royal eagle is blazoned, together with the word expediency? Let him decline that road and take the narrow, thorny path where integrity leads, though with no prouder emblem than the dove. He may there find the needed remedy which, like the white root, the moly, detected by the patient and resolved Odysseus, shall have power to restore the herd of men, disguised by the enchantress to whom they had willingly yielded in, and this is erased here, I can't see it, in the something of brutes, to the stature and beauty of men, signed with a star. Now, there's a number of clues in here. Clearly, this is an abolitionist, but he values sincerity so greatly that he even gives Jackson and Calhoun the benefit of being sincere. And his indication is at least that people are sincere, wiser men will somehow find the right path. There's biblical references in here, like the still small voice and the straight path. Margaret Fuller was not really a very active Christian, as near as I can tell. She gave it lip service a few times, but Mathew lived by it. So that's why he brings in these references. He was not patriotic in the blind sense. So there's some, and he had studied the ancient Greeks. Some of these things you could attribute to Margaret Fuller, sort of, kind of, but they're very deeply characteristic of Mathew Franklin Whittier if you go into his works and study his life. This is, aside from the fact that the signature has been his for many years, this is clearly Mathew and not Margaret Fuller. Now, I don't think she really modified this too terribly much. She was the literary editor. She occasionally stuck her thumb in, especially if there was something she really disagreed with, or somebody that Mathew wasn't giving proper praise to. She might modify a little bit. She might have had a hand in the business with Calhoun and Jackson, I don't know. But I don't think she modified this too terribly much. I think this is pretty much straight Mathew Franklin Whittier. So that's our 4th of July. In terms of the higher mind staying the same, I feel the same way. I haven't changed one bit on this. And these are the things that come from the higher mind, the values, the attitudes, the take on life, the point of view, the world view. I haven't changed at all since I was Mathew. So I'm exactly the same person in this regard. I feel exactly the same way about the country. And I think we could very easily and fairly say that this applies to our life today and our country today in 2021, just as much as it did in 1845. We're still in deep shit, and there's still potential for good. And it is still sincerity and spirituality and purity of motive that's really needed. And we hope that the young people are coming up through the schools and colleges that will save us. Nothing's changed, really, except we have greater technological abilities to destroy not only the entire country, but the entire planet. That's changed. Otherwise, I think the mix of good and evil hasn't really changed very much. The mix of wisdom and ignorance and sincerity and insincerity hasn't changed a whole lot. So this 4th of July, this is my celebration for the 4th of July. Basically the same as Mathew.